Shri Gurubhyom Namaha. This is Hemalata from Ponvidyashram. Today's session is continuation of chapter 2 from History, Our Paths 1 from hunting gathering to growing food. In previous session we learned how the early people domesticated plants and animals. During domestication, nomadic hunter-gatherers began to settle in places. Around 10,000 years ago, Neolithic age had started towards a settled life. Archaeologists have found traces of huts or houses at some sites. For instance, in Barzaham in present-day Kashmir, people built pit houses which were dug into the ground with steps leading into them. These may have provided shelter in cold weather. Archaeologists have also found cooking hearths both inside and outside the huts, which suggests that depending on the weather, people could cook food either indoors or outdoors. Pit houses. What are pit houses? People used stone tools to dig circular pits into the ground. Then they plastered their sides with mud. These pits were usually narrow at the top and wide at the base. The pits were deep, had steps that led down. Ash, charcoal, and pieces of pottery have been found in these pits. Some of the pits had ovens made of stone or clay. These ovens may have been used to cook food. Perhaps people lived in these pit houses when the weather was cold. Stone tools have been found from many sites as well. Many of these are different from the earlier Paleolithic tools, and that is why they are called Neolithic. Paleolithic tools were made of wood, stone, and animal bones. Neolithic era tools were more sophisticated. A variety of tools were invented in the New Stone Age, such as sickle, blades, and grinding stones for agriculture, and pottery and bone implements for food production. Some features of the Neolithic age. The Neolithic or New Stone Age denotes to a stage of human culture following the Paleolithic and Mesolithic periods, and is characterized by the use of polished stone implements, development of permanent dwellings, cultural advances such as pottery making, domestication of animals and plants, and the cultivation of grain. The tools that were polished to give a fine cutting edge and mortars and pestles used for grinding grain and other plant produce. Mortars and pestles are used for grinding grain even today, several thousand years later. At the same time, tools of the Paleolithic types continued to be made and used, and remember, some tools were also made of bones. The Neolithic or New Stone Age denotes to a stage of human culture following the Paleolithic and Mesolithic periods. So during this age, mankind would have looked for the things around him that were in abundance and could be used to create things of use. One of those things was clay, which is a special soil that is thick and quite malleable when wet. So it can be formed into shapes. After being allowed to dry, it will harden into that shape for later use. Working with clay is a chemical process as it involves many different kinds of synthesis. like using water to change the state from hard to soft and then using the air or oxygen to change the state again chemically from soft to hot, which can also be done with heat, another chemical process. The very first chemical synthesis used by mankind was in the working of clay to create pottery. The remains of ornamental clay artifacts go all the way back to the Paleolithic age, which itself dates back 2.5 million years ago. By the Neolithic age, clay modeling in the form of pottery had taken on a life of its own. This pottery was used for religious rituals, for cooking, and for the bearing of water and foodstuffs. Pottery could also be used when eating, as in the creation of bowls. Many kinds of earthen pots have also been found. These were sometimes decorated and were used for storing things. People began using pots for cooking food, especially grains like rice, wheat, and lentils that now become an important part of the diet. Besides, they began weaving cloth using different kinds of materials. For example, cotton that could now be grown. Did things change everywhere and all at once? Not quite. In many areas, men and women still continued to hunt and gather food, and elsewhere, people adopted farming and herding slowly over several thousand years. Besides, in some cases, people tried to combine these activities, doing different things during different seasons. Now we will study about a site in detail. Look at this map. Can you find Meergarh here? We are going to study about Meergarh now. There are lots of Neolithic sites in India. Then why do we choose Meergarh? Is there any speciality to Meergarh? Meergarh is the earliest known Neolithic site in the northwest Indian subcontinent, with early evidence of farming wheat and barley, herding cattle, sheep, and goats, and metallurgy. Mehergarh is considered to be one of the most important Neolithic sites in archaeology. It is now considered to be a precursor to the Indus Valley civilization. Its discovery shed new light on the development of agricultural technologies and agrarian lifestyles of the ancient Stone Age peoples of South India. This site is located in a fertile plain near the Bolan Pass, which is one of the most important routes into Iran. Mehergarh was probably one of the places where women and men learnt to grow barley and wheat and rear sheep and goats for the first time in this area. It is one of the earliest villages that we know about. Village is one of the distinctive features of a village is that most people who live there are engaged in food production. Archaeologists who excavated the site found evidence of many kinds of animal bones from the earliest levels. These included bones of wild animals such as the deer and pig. In later levels, they found more bones of sheep and goat, and in still later levels, cattle bones are most common, suggesting that this was the animal that was generally kept by the people. The site of Mehergarh in the Kutchi Bek Plains is not really impressive mound. Its various levels are scattered across 300 acres in a way that is truly exasperating from the modern archaeologists. Unlike the regular archaeological mound with its neat, multi layered, chocolate cake like stratigraphy, Mehergarh was occupied at different spatial locations at different times, and this resulted in a stratigraphy to a scattered deck of cards with different layers belonging to different periods, not in sequence and lying scattered across the landscape. Here, semi nomadic people using plants such as wheat and barley and animals such as sheep, goats, and cattle developed the earliest farming. The settlement had been constructed with simple mud buildings with four internal subdivisions. Numerous burials have been found, many with elaborate goods such as baskets, stone and bone tools, beads, bangles, pendants, and occasionally animal sacrifices, with more goods left with burials of males. Ornaments of seashell, limestone, turquoise, and polished copper have been found along with simple figurines of women and animals. Seashells from far seashore and lapis lazuli found far in Badakhshan, Afghanistan shows good contact with those areas. A single ground stone axe had been discovered in a burial and several more found on the surface. Those ground stone axes represent the earliest to come from a stratified context in the South Asia. At remains of each square or rectangular houses, each house had four or more compartments, some of which may have been used for storage. When people die, their relatives and friends generally pay respect to them. People look after them, perhaps in the belief that there is some form of life after death. Burial is one such arrangement. Several burial sites have been found at Mehergarh. In one instance, the dead person was buried with goats, which were probably meant to serve as food in the next world. Earlier and later levels. We saw that archaeologists had found different bones at different levels of foundings. Here, how they found all these bones at different levels, how they study all these things. When archaeologists are digging at an excavation site, how do they know which level is earlier and which is later? Look at this illustration. Suppose people first start living on flat land. Layer 4. Look at layer 4. Over the years, the surface will gradually rise because people discard waste material and generally stay and rebuild houses in the same place. After hundreds of years, this leads to the formation of a mound. So, when this mound is dug up, what is found from the upper layers of the mound is generally from a later time than what is found from the lower layers of the mound, which are older. These upper and lower layers are often referred to as levels. Elsewhere, find France in your atlas. Take your atlas and find France in your atlas. The painting that is shown here is a painting from a cave in France. This site was discovered by four school children more than 100 years ago. Paintings like this were made between 20,000 and 10,000 years ago. Many of these were of animals such as wild horses, aurochs, an older wild form of cattle, bison, woolly rhinoceros, reindeer, and bear, painted in bright colors. These colors were made from minerals like ochre or iron ore and charcoal. It is possible that these paintings were done on ceremonial occasions, or perhaps they were made for special rituals performed by hunters before they went in search of prey. Can you think of any reasons? Now find Turkey in your atlas. One of the most famous Neolithic sites, Çatalhöyük, was found in Turkey. Several things were brought from great distances: flint from Syria, cowries from the Red Sea, shells from the Mediterranean Sea, and used in the settlement. Remember, there were no carts. Most things would have been carried on the backs of pack animals such as cattle or by people. What do you think cowries and shells would have been used for? After people started to settle in a place, then group of people and a society emerged, which in turn changed into cities. So this is how the cities were formed and the people started to live in groups. Thank you.